Please take one, but don't be greedy. This is Karachi. There are enough princesses to go around. But what we're actually going to be talking about today is the world of the novel. I don't know what that means. I hope to find out. With me today are Claire Chambers, who is an academic and lectures in global literature in the UK. Gioia Guerzoni from Italy, who's a translator. Thomas Brussig from Berlin, who's a novelist. Bernardo Carvalho, I'm sorry I mutilated your name, from Brazil, who's also a novelist. And Aamir Mufti, who's a scholar and academic and at UC Berkeley, right? Or UCLA? UCLA, my apologies. So I'd like to start with you, Bernardo. You're a journalist and a playwright as well as a novelist, but your first collection was a collection of short stories. So may I ask but your next 9 were novels. What drew you to the novel in the first place?
Well, what enticed you? I think it doesn't...
Is it on?
No, it's not. But I don't know what...
Can we try that?
Just doesn't
make
change
it.
anything. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
No. I think it's
No.
not good. Yeah.
Now it's working. Yeah.
So what enticed me to the novel is, I think it's... I used to think that it was a free form, the freest form that in literature that I could find, and so I had for me it was the idea of doing the possibility of doing anything through literature. It's different from short stories that I find. Like the short story is a very rigid form, so you have some things that you must follow, some rules that you must follow. The same with poetry. Even with free verse, I think it's still very rigid, very I don't know, concentrated. And the novel is kind of free and flexible, and that was what I really liked about the genre. But I think it changed a lot from when I began till now. And I think it changed basically because of the market and the rules that we began to follow, and a kind of the idea of a very basic and elementary idea of realism took hold of the novel. And I think everybody is following this idea, which is kind of narrowing in a way. So it's I find it's becoming a classic form in the bad sense of the word, and so I don't know, but I think what enticed me to the novel is basically the idea of a free form.
Okay, that seems to me to be an insight into how the internal world of the novel is being influenced by the external world, which is what you referred to just now as the market, and the creeping in of gritty realism. Thomas, is this something that you have also experienced, writing novels in Germany, or...
I was fascinated, or I am fascinated by novels because they are free. That's right. There is a big variety of forms, but I think novels are all different. But every novel has its own rules. So you have to develop the rules of a novel by writing it, and then you experience it's not so free as you think. Yeah? And I think the novel the novel as a form is free, but when you start to work on a novel, you will experience that that the longer you work, the less freedom you have, and the novel is not only free; it's also very, very difficult. I think it's the most difficult form in literature.
Haruki Murakami, in his book "What I Talk About When I Talk About Running," said that the process of novel writing includes an element of toxicity. You're dealing with toxic material. So to write a novel, you actually have to make yourself physically fit to be able to combat that toxicity. As novelists, have both of you followed that, or was that just his version of it?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the physical aspect of novel writing.
Olympic sport.
Yeah, maybe Murakami comes to an age where he has to stress it, that he is very fit. I confess I gained weight about 20 kilograms since I started novel writing. Maybe how long I can do it. But seriously, Günter Grass said that he, and he is, I think he's 84 now, he said he don't said he is too old. He said he is too weak to write such a big thing like a novel anymore. So he said to the readers, don't expect another novel from me. Yeah? And John Irving said that you can train yourself, that you write not only 2 or 3 hours a day, but up to 8 and 9 hours a day.
So it's an endurance sport like marathon running and not a sprint?
For some writers.
Okay.
That, but the novel writers are as different as their novels, and so I think there are many, many writers who argue Irving.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about writing a novel and you feel that you need to lose weight to do it, you don't. That's the good news. Bernardo, you had something to add?
I think there are no rules, never. And this is the thing that I like with novels. You can reinvent it always. And if a writer says something, you can contradict him immediately with what you still doing writing novels. And so this is great. So I don't feel it is toxic. I think for me, the only thing is that I feel that I have to protect myself to some toxicity.
Toxicity.
Yeah, toxicity. I'm sorry, my English is very poor, but which comes from outside, not inside. When I'm inside the novel, I'm kind of protected. I'm kind of taken by it, and it's very difficult, but it's kind of delirious, or so I'm taken by the work. But on the other hand, I think you should not also mystify the idea of the author, like doing this or that. It's very simple. It can be very simple and very down to earth. And there's there are no rules. I can write. I don't have to be like out of the world and not answering the phone, not talking to anyone. I can have a regular life and write just like a few sentences in the morning and then a few sentences by the evening, and I'm done, and I can do a book in 1 year, and it could be slender or it can be long. It doesn't matter. But I think you should not create rules to the arts, and you should not mystify the idea of the author. That's basic.
I agree with you, but at the same time there are though myths that continue to circulate about the ideal novelist or a certain kind of novelist or how a novelist should be. And before I turn to you ladies, I'd like to ask you one last question, the two of you, which is one of the myths you hear about constantly is when a novelist is writing a novel, at some point the characters become alive and take over. And this is something I've read about again and again. Has that ever happened to you? Do they pull you into their world? Is there such a thing?
It does, and it's very nice when it does, because it's very easy to follow a character which is alive. But still, on the other hand, I think there are some rules which are being created from the outside world, from the market, basically, which is now the novel, and it's very narrowing. Any reviewer or any critic nowadays tend to begin criticizing a novel based on its likelihood. So it's if a novel doesn't have characters which are made out of flesh and blood, it's basically despised. And I think this is very bad because it's a narrowing way of understanding the novel. I like novels to be in different forms. If I want to write a novel in which characters are not made out of flesh and blood and are completely intellectual and just like ideas, or I think you should have the right to do it, and it's still a novel, and it can be very good. So if you take Beckett, it's not out of flesh and blood. If you take Thomas Bernhard, it's not out of flesh and blood. And so I think there's a narrowing understanding of the novel, which is based on what works for the market, because it's easier for the reader to identify with flesh and blood characters and with a kind of basic realism in which you recognize life. And I think it can be very very bad for the idea of what a novel can be. I think it's nice to keep a broad understanding of what a novel can be.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that? Or? Okay, Gioia, I want to bring you in here at this point when we talk about the narrowing of the idea of the novel. But before that, I want to read a quote that I read in one of your interviews, which is, of a text, the critic is only the fleeting wooer, the author is father and husband, while the translator is the lover. That puts you in a somewhat unique position. So could you tell us a little bit about...
The quote is by this amazing Sicilian writer, Buffalino, that has been translated. Very few of his works have been translated, so that adds to the idea that translation is tantamount. So in Italy, we also have very few writers are translated into English, and we're a very small nation. Our language is not as widespread as, say, Spanish or English. So the translator is the actual bridge. And the more I travel, I've been translating many Indian writers over the past 20 years, because I used to spend and I still do most of my winters in India, so I got to know the literature there, and so I started pitching to publishers. So my work was also, like active as a translator, and passive when the publisher would call me and offer me a translation, or active when I would go to the publisher. And of course the market has changed dramatically. It was easier for me years back to come back from India with the physical books before PDFs or Kindles and pitch it to a publisher. Now the market has changed. For me, it's also exciting because it's like I started exploring other countries besides India. So I started going towards Southeast Asia, and that is where some of the markets are very interesting because they're new. So, for instance, Indonesia is going to be guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and to see the process starting now in Indonesia to translate, because that's the main point of the whole thing. Very few people can read Bahasa, and the other languages. So translation in a case like that, like Indonesia, becomes a very special bridge and totally necessary. So the genre of the novel, especially trying to look at it from a kind of universal point of view, with all the problems and the narrowings the market imposes, still the novel is the most, I would say, is the easiest form to approach in a way. Because if you only have a collection of short stories, you can't enter the market. That's one of the disadvantages, because it's very hard. So, translation becomes a very important bridge. In some countries, it's like the main thing.
But do you like translating novels? Would you prefer to be translating novels as opposed to short stories? Or
I love translating. I'm in a very peculiar position because I'm now translating like Iris Murdoch, and all her novels are completely different, talking about freedom of form. And I think she wrote like 26 novels, and they're all very different. And I'll have to translate, I think, 6 in the next 6 years. And I'm also starting to translate Saki, which is the king of short stories. It's like 3 pages each. So if it's good writing, I like to translate both genres.
What is different between older novels and novels today? Are we not seeing any more Dickensian or epic stories anymore, or has the external world intruded so far into the novel that there's no structural integrity? What's happening?
Contemporary writers have just last year I translated, for instance, Teju Cole. So the structure of a novel like that, which was successful and got PEN awards, and I love translating that novel. And yesterday I got the news from my publisher that I'm going to translate the non-fiction about Lagos. So that is in a way, is a completely new structure, but the inspiration comes from Sebald, and I mean the layers are there. So there are differences, but the roots are more or less the same. And, you know, it's a novel like that is just about, I mean, from very external point of view, it's just walking around New York and talking to people. And then when you read between the lines is actual, is huge issues that crop up in conversations that are like casual. So it is, in a way, I think one of the reasons for the success of that novel was, apart from the good writing, was that it was a non-action novel, so, and highly literary.
Okay. Claire, I'd like to bring you in at this point. You lecture in global literature, and you focus in particular on South Asia and the Arab world and their diasporas. What drew you specifically to that area or this area? Because I think when we talk about stuff like this, where people read novels to get a sense of other cultures now in a way that they didn't before. Before, people used to read because they wanted to read. But now that your choice of text is almost a political choice. So,
well, for me, it was something quite personal. I spent a year before I went to university in Peshawar teaching English, which has shaped my whole career, really. In fact, I went to Mardan in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and wasn't very happy there, so managed to get a different job in a school in Peshawar and spent a full year there in the 90s. And then I went to university and studied English literature. And any opportunity I had to study what was starting to be called post-colonial literature was what really fascinated me, having lived in this place that no one in England knew anything about. And at that time there wasn't so much Pakistani writing on the syllabus, so I was working more on India, but I've increasingly moved westwards. Again, for pragmatic and personal reasons, the project that I've been doing on British Muslims is because I had small children. So I wasn't able to come to the subcontinent when they were small, so I was working on Bradford, which is the city next door. For these reasons I was attracted to it.
Okay. Aamir, post-colonial, global, discourse, etc. These words, which I as a novelist find very intimidating because I don't know what they mean and I don't know why they should be relevant. As a scholar and an academic, could you tell me a little bit about how this looks from the outside, what you've seen?
Well, they're meant to be intimidating.
Oh.
You're meant to be afraid. I don't think this works.
Can we? Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm obviously not a novelist. I don't write novels, but I read them. But I'm also a professional reader. I get paid to read novels, which means I guess in some ways I'm part of the external world that you're talking about, although not quite the market. I was thinking about the phrase, the world of the novel, and it seemed to me that there are at least two senses in which it makes a kind of sense. First of all, that novels typically reveal a world to us, some kind of world, an alternative world usually. A novel may focus on this or that detail, but in fact it ultimately shows us how the details are linked together in a larger whole, which we might call a world. So that's in part what is attractive to me about novels. In a second sense of this phrase, and here I'm coming closer to your question, I think, the novel is, it seems to me, the dominant form in world literature today. And this has not always been the case, obviously, but it certainly appears to be the dominant genre of writing today, more than poetry, more than drama, short stories. It's the writing of novels that seems to get a language or a country or a tradition recognition on the world stage in world literature. In our part of the world, of course, The novel is a very recent phenomenon in this part of the world, really very, very recent. And in English, it's about the day before yesterday, really, in historical terms. You know, the English language novel, especially in Pakistan, is a very recent phenomenon. But somehow we've forgotten this, and it's sort of become naturalized as the form in which people write and supposedly have always written. So in this sense, it seems to me the world of the novel, rather than simply attracting us to the novel as a form, should make us sort of cautious and try to think about how this one genre has come to be dominant in the way that it has, how it seems to have displaced other kinds of writing to the margins in some ways. I've pretty much described what I understand by post-colonial just now. Okay? So it's not so intimidating. It's a series of questions about how the realities of the literary world have come to acquire the shape that they have come to acquire over the years. And I think in particular we really have to think about what the English language novel really means in Pakistan. Obviously we're talking about a very small readership. The books are not even published really in Pakistan. The local editions are published largely in India, as I understand it. Correct me please if I'm wrong. None of which I don't mean this as a critique of the English language novel. I'm just saying these are very pertinent facts that we need to try and sort of understand about it. For instance, is it possible to imagine an event like the KLF in Karachi if the recent celebrity of English language novelists globally had not occurred in the way that it has? In other words, if our major literature was still in Urdu, was still in Punjabi, was still in Sindhi, Pashto, Balochi, could we have had such an event with the kind of exposure that it gets? So in other words, English is a dominant global language today, not just in the world of business and finance and trade and all that, but really also in the literary world. And it's affecting in all kinds of ways what is being written in places like Pakistan, what people are reading in places like Pakistan.
Absolutely,
so that's the entire post-colonial paradigm I was just giving.
But I brought up the idea of post-colonial because I thought it would logically take us to this point precisely, which is this boom that we are supposed to be part of even real? There seems to have been a push recently for novel writing to become sexy. Everybody wants to be a writer now. It's almost like, guitarists, people want to play the guitar to get chicks. Now you have young men wanting to write novels.
Well, they're getting nice advice from British and American publishers.
Yeah, so that is the external world of the novel. That has changed, and it seems to have become more ruthless. But how affected are you by that as writers? Do you even care? I mean, I don't care. Do you?
I do care a lot.
You do? Okay.
Actually, I do care because I think it interferes in the genre itself. It becomes, when I was talking about realism, it's a kind of realism which is very basic and very elementary, and it's very poor in a way, I think. And it's becoming, it seems on the surface that it's very diverse, but I think deep down, it's just like it's the same form being reproduced, and it's it's an idea of the novel which is very uniform, and it, as I was telling you about the flesh and blood character, this is like it's very elementary, like it's something. For instance, my novels, as I understand them, they are like when I take hold on the reality itself, it's a scene, it's a kind of a theater. It's not reality anymore. So when I write, it's not the representation of reality. It's something already which is mediated by another kind of layer. And this kind of novel doesn't work because it doesn't create immediate identification with the reader. You have to make some effort. You have to, there's some kind of reflection, there's some kind of second degree thoughts that you have to I don't know, it's a kind of a co-work, like when you're a reader of this kind of novels, you have to be a co-writer, a co-creator. And it's not like the immediate relation that this realist basic. I love realism. That's like Joyce is a total realist writer, and I love him. And it's, but it's different. I think it's becoming narrower, as I told.
Okay, so maybe one could even say that the walls between the internal and external world are collapsing.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but I disagree. First of all, I think literature and even novels are addressed to minorities. This is my business. I know that I write for minorities, and I can be happy when I reach a lot of readers with such a book. But it's luck. First of all, I have to address my book to minorities. A book that looks for majorities stinks, I used to say. And what you say about the dominating form of that the novel is the dominating form in literature, I agree with you. But I think that the dominating form in storytelling now today is the film, the movie. And since there are movies, the novel had to retreat and to reinvent itself. And the novel does it very successful. I think first person is in the use of first person in novels was forced by the coming up of movies, because you can't tell a movie in first person, not so strong and so impressive as in novels. And a lot of modern novels are constructed in a very interesting way. So bad novels have all the time, have written for at all the time. I'm sorry for my English. I am a little bit time lagged. So bad novels have been written all the time, and bad novels are written today too. So I'm not angry that there are bad novels written today.
They're considered good.
The reviewers and the critics.
Yeah, but the development and the reinvention of novels today is very interesting. You have amazing novels today.
Because novels have to compete with film.
Bad and mediocre novels, but also a lot of very good and very interesting constructed novels.
Yeah, I don't think they are bad. I think they are becoming uniform. We don't see it, but there's a trend which makes novels yeah. No, I don't think they are bad. Actually, I love some of them. I really love, and I think there are lots of good novels being published. I only think that the genre is becoming more and more kind of uniformed and
uniform to
the market. Could I interrupt, gentlemen?
But I think it's not diverse as it seems. You know?
Okay. Could I interrupt you for 1 second? One, I would ask you whether the genre is actually becoming narrower, or our perception of it is becoming narrower, because what tends to get reviewed and what tends to get written about might be the popular things. And my second question was for you, Tomas, because what you brought up a very important point. I personally hate film because I think it's the novel's biggest enemy right now. But, okay, I don't hate it. I was exaggerating. But two of your novels have been adapted into films. So could you, what was that like for you as a storyteller? How did you see the change? Was there a change? Was it diminished? Was it enhanced?
It's interesting. Only one was really transformed into a movie. The second, the idea was always an idea for a movie. And when the movie was made, I realized that some of the best ideas were not used for the movie, and so I had to think, how can I transform the material into a literary form and make a novel from it? And the movie that was, or the novel that was transformed into a movie, I said, you can't bring it in a movie because it's written in first person, and it's an interesting first person. It's an interesting first person. So the hook or the charm of the reason of the novel, you don't find it in the movie. So you have to invent your own reason to make the movie, and it was not convincing, I think. But the movie is not the enemy of the novel. because we have the movie, the novel has to reinvent itself, and that's and this is important. So it seemed to be an enemy, but we can be thankful to the movie that it pushed the novel to their limits.
That is a wise perspective. Claire, can I bring you in here on this question of, are more bad novels being written if arguably more bad novels are being written, or is this a matter of perception?
Well, I don't really agree with this one. It says it's on.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that some of the most exciting work is being done in the middle between the short story and the novel. And that actually it's not quite so easy to draw the borderline between the two. I mean, this has been going on for a long time with writers like the Canadian Nobel Prize winner Alice Munro with a short story sequence where they're linked. But I think it's particularly strong in South Asia. The Sri Lankan novelist Shyam Salvadori's Funny Boy, the stories stand alone, but you can also read them because the characters recur and they age. In a way, it's a Bildungsroman, but it's also short stories. And we're seeing this now in Pakistan, increasingly so. Daniel Moinuddiin's Rooms, what's it called?
In Other Rooms.
You know, there are patterns, and the landlord character recurs in all the stories in different perspectives. And now Bilal, I think he's gone, but I reviewed Bilal Tanweer's The Scatter Here is Too Great, and a lot of the problem in writing that review was actually, what is this? It's being sold as short stories, but the characters have connections with each other, and they're all united by the bomb blast that takes place in Karachi. So for me, that's one of the interesting trends right now, that destabilizes our whole notion of what the novel form is.
But again, we're talking about novels in English. Gioia, as a translator, do you see any wider trends, or is it business as usual on both sides of it?
No, there are wider trends. I was thinking when movies were mentioned that while I was staying in Jakarta, where I was kind of trying to facilitate workshops on translation, not knowing Bahasa, but knowing the publishers and knowing that that's the only way that we have to read what's coming out of Indonesia, and there's going to be like 100 novels translated from Bahasa in the next 2 years, which is kind of a huge accomplishment. And thanks to The Act of Killing, which is this, it was just nominated for the Oscars recently, a huge amount of novels were written on the same subject in the same year, and they were all different, like 2 novels, 3 non-fiction books. So it was kind of the movie, which was amazing, and I think we should all see that movie because it is a work of art, and it's a documentary on what happened in the 66 killings. It spurred a whole new generation of novels by local writers who wrote both in Bahasa, or in one case they wrote in Bahasa and translate, like one author, Lakshmi Pamuntiak. She translated herself into English to have a wider market. Or, I mean, the other option is find translators, and that's a huge problem, especially for certain languages. That's why, going back to these days of workshops, it's so important to have workshops from, say, Urdu into English, because it's bridging that. And you have to create a generation of translators, or you have to help the existing ones, getting good contracts. It's a whole that gets linked to the market, but translation is the beginning of the process if you write in Urdu or Pashto or whatever.
So the consistent thing is quality, and if you write something that's worth it, it'll last. Aamir, you described yourself as a professional reader a little while ago. As a professional reader, is there a difference in what is coming across your desk, or in what you're reading, or has the way you read changed?
Well, I mean, one of the things... is it working? Yeah? I mean, in my own case, what has changed is that I've had to, in some ways, add another language to what I read. that is to say, in English. I mean, I've been reading Urdu literature for many years as part of my work, my research, and the Pakistani novel in English in the last few years has meant that I've actually had to go back to reading in English, which is my PhD training. But I sort of do share some of your concerns about what the market is. I don't think it's something very easily definable, but I think nevertheless there are all kinds of pressures on writers, on writing, and there is a tendency towards this sort of easy reading possibility that sort of just levels things out. And a movie can be an enemy of the novel that is based on sometimes, as you know. You know, movie adaptation can actually kill the novel in some ways. The reluctant fundamentalist, I think, would be such a case. Hope I haven't offended anyone. Anyway, so... Sorry? Oh, really? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just keep it in front of you.
I'll keep it very close, yeah. Anyway, that's just sort of what I wanted to say. So, what has really fascinated me from the distance where I live in the U.S., is this massive transformation that is taking place in Pakistan. In literary terms, it's not as if our national and provincial languages are disappearing as literary languages, but all of a sudden, Pakistan is on the literary map globally in a way that it was not when there was no major English language tradition of writing in the country. And I'm interested in thinking about what that means for these tremendous literatures in the other languages that in some cases are ancient and extremely powerful forms of writing. And Urdu is perhaps the greatest language in the world for the short story as a form. I mean, it has developed the short story over the last century and a half in ways that no other language I know has. And it's always treated the novel as a secondary form, not to be disrespected or something, but it doesn't see it as the antagonist of the short story. The short story writer can occasionally write a novel or something of that sort. There are great novels in Urdu, obviously, but I think it wouldn't be incorrect to say that the short story remains really the major genre in some ways. So that's part of what's fascinating to me, is the way that's changing what it means to be a Pakistani writer. As you say, young men, that's interesting as well. It's very gendered. So far...
Sorry.
Well, why aren't more
No,
women
I'm just
writing?
kidding. A lot of women are writing, actually.
Maybe not the big macho novels. I mean, it might be something
See,
else.
this opens an entire different can of worms, because there's chicklit and there's what I call dicklit.
Yeah.
And for some reason, dicklit is always considered more important. But I actually wanted to go back to your point about the hunger for the novel. Can we see this? And I agree with you. I think there's a bubble being created which cannot be sustained, and at some point it's going to burst. Can we see this hunger for the novel as a search for an acceptable sacred text? Because this is the age of the battle of the sacred text. And I almost ask myself as a writer sometimes, where is this, the ravenous market or the external pressures? What's it coming from?
Yeah.
And really, as a novelist or a writer or anybody who's part of this, how do you battle that? And should you even be thinking about it? I don't think one should, as a writer, be concerned too much unless you're not getting your royalties or...
I don't know. I think I think you were asking about like if the problem is our perception, that our perception is narrowing. Okay. I think it's the readership has always been, in general, conservative. My problem now is that I don't know why. Well, maybe because of the market. I find that criticism is becoming more conservative, and it's like maybe because there are too many novels being published worldwide, and you have to naturally find an absolute criteria to judge books, and this is very weird. Like very good reviewers, people, very clever people. Very smart people, they are following very conservative rules. They have an assessment of the novel which is very conservative. And like 50 years ago, these same people would be doing things completely different in criticism. And now they are criticizing the novels like based on like blood and flesh and blood characters, which is ridiculous. And it became something that is it's consensual, like a novel with a
flesh and blood characters, it's something to be despised.
Yeah.
And this is very weird. And it's like it's being done by very, very smart people.
Yeah.
So I think the readership has always been conservative. This is natural. But that criticism has turned into a conservative aspect of literature is very
offensive, scary.
Yeah.
Well, if I could you mentioned John Irving earlier. John Irving's had this to say about reviewers and critics, which is that basically there were people who were paid to finish novels, and the rest of us, after we left school, had that choice. We could choose not to finish a novel. Whereas these are people who have to finish a novel. No wonder they're bitter and unhappy. John Irving's words, not mine. Tomas, have you had any run-ins with reviewers or critics? Do you also agree that the nature of criticism has changed? Has it become more conservative or more driven by agenda than it used to be?
I agree with you that readers are conservative, that the criticisms are conservative, but the readers are also curious, and that's why a new form or a real original always has a chance, and this is wonderful in literature that we all want to be surprised by a book that we don't expect, and with the curiosity of the readers, we can count on that. And the critics are not so important today because they're in the German situation is that we have many bookstores, and the booksellers are also a kind of critics, and there's some, I don't want to say bestsellers, I say bestsellers. Some bestsellers are made by from the bookstores, not from the critics. We have the internet. There are reviews among readers. Readers. I missed the word. Readers say, read this book, it's fantastic, I love that book, and when many readers agree, so we have a kind of wave, and so I think it's everything is getting difficult and everything is getting easier, and there are not only reasons to complain. There are also new chances that we didn't expect 20 years ago.
Again, very wise and positive words.
Yes.
You are a satirist, right? You are a satirist.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Gioia, do you think that there is more political writing than there used to be, more editorializing in the texts that you come across from all parts of the world?
I think when it depends on which countries, and there's waves of there's also waves and trends of literatures that come to the limelight. Like, for instance, of course, in 2 years we'll have a flood of Indonesian literature and many political writings from that part of the world. But for sure, once that trend is on, like now in Italy, for instance, we're experiencing a huge trend of African writers, and for African writers, I mean both residents and the so-called Afropolitans. So once that bridge is open in a way, and you have a whole load of say novels from Africa, then the further step is kind of political. The issue becomes more. Usually, you can be more political, but then first you have to start with, family stories, and then you can have that kind of perspective.
Why do you have to start with family stories?
I don't know. It's just, as we were saying, conservative readership.
Okay.
But add conservative publishers. I mean, they make the market. Because if I go and say, look, I found this amazing book about whatever, they said, oh, I'll tell you a very little example. In Italy, up to 10, 15 years ago, we had, apart from, they like Amitav Ghosh was already very, very famous, and Salman Rushdie was famous. But then we had a whole load of the most boring family histories and, spices and that kind of stuff. Okay. And then suddenly there was like one book about, of course, then Arundhati Roy was translated into Italian. So from then on, we started having more literature on, contemporary issues and politics and blah blah blah. So it's the reader is conservative, but the publisher makes it easier because they think, oh, the readers need something easier to start with, which I don't agree with. But we are very strong readers, and you have to. I mean, they are stuck with the fact that they have to sell. So if something easy sells, then they say, oh, while you're in Asia, it's like as if I'm going to the supermarket. Why don't you find me something easy from Pakistan? They would say something like that. And it's very true. It's like, go to the supermarket and bring me something, nice. And of course I don't do that because luckily I'm not, basically I translate 85% of my time is devoted to translation. The rest is scouting. But if I had to scout for bestsellers and the bestsellers they want, I wouldn't be able to do it because most of the times I don't like that kind of bestsellers. And the stuff I find, it's very difficult nowadays, especially in these crisis years, it's very difficult to pitch. But then luckily you can pitch it somewhere else, Okay. As long as the novels circulate, sometimes I don't care if it's published in Italy, but, I can send it to a French friend of mine who is a publisher or a Spanish friend of mine, as long as it goes around.
So the novel is in no real danger. These are all cycles and they'll go up.
I think so.
I have no idea that we have covered so much time, but we apparently only have 3 minutes left. So very quickly, if there are any questions, please raise your hand. Okay, do we have mics for them or? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Firuze Romer, and I'm also a novelist, and I found this panel really inspiring, so thank you. I was just wondering if some of you or all of you would tell us what some of your favorite novels are.
Claire, why don't you start?
I might take the other question as well.
Yeah, so go on.
I was really fascinated by Bernardo, saying that, readers are looking for flesh and blood characters, You really mean well-rounded characters, right? Like stuff about getting inside the head and not cookie cutter. Two-dimensional characters. Is that what you say? Now, the problem with my writing is I would have been really done with writing a book in Pakistan had I not come across an editor who basically was really very, very smart.
Sir, I'm really sorry to cut you off, but we have 2 minutes, so could you please...
All right, I'm sorry. What I need to say is I have a problem only because I'm not supposed to create a three-dimensional book. And two-dimensional characters, like all our Pakistanis are doing, really, they have cookie cuts, right? Now, with the three-dimensional characters, it's taking a while. Should I just carry on, or should I just give up and just get done with the task, with the job?
Okay, great question. Let's start with you, Claire, and then Bernardo, you can...
Okay, quickly. It's such a hard question. I'm glad I had a bit more time to think about it. But I'm just going to say the one I read most recently, which I thought was brilliant, which is Tabish Khair's How to Fight Islamist Terror from the Missionary Position, Indian writer, but feels like a Pakistani novel. Even the protagonist is Pakistani, and it's hilarious.
Missionary Position, right?
Yeah, it's very good.
Gioia, your favorite novel? That's an impossible question, but does anybody have...
I have to think about it.
Okay. Do either of you have one particular text that you...
There are novels that impress me a lot, and they impressed me for years. And I wish that Sparkle will come to my writing. Sometimes it does, sometimes not. And I was very impressed by the, I don't know the English title, by the book of Mario Vargas Llosa about the assassination of the president of the Dominican Republic. Do you know?
No.
Do you know the Festes Ziegenbox. If a German can shout the title in English.
Can anybody
Das
translate
Festes
that?
Feast of the Goat.
Okay, this one. And another novel is from a writer who comes from the Dominican Republic, but who is in US now, Junot Diaz, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a...
All right. Bernardo, you?
Well, I have many, and it keeps changing, and it depends on my mood. And so recently, because now I'm entering midlife, I was reading Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, and I was fascinated by the character of the consul, and which is like you identify with in a very layered manner. But I don't know, I love Bulgakov, like The Master and Margarita, which I hadn't read. I don't know, I love lots of novels. It's difficult, and I love, as I have told you here, like Thomas Bernhard, which is an Austrian writer, and there are many, almost all his novels are amazing. So I don't know.
Are there novels?
Huh?
Did Bernhard write novels?
He only did it.
I'm not sure if it is novel. It's, but it's the freedom of novel that you.
This is what I was telling. For me, this is a novel, and it's like one of the masterpieces of world literature ever. Yeah.
Aamir, do you have
So one of my favorite novels, I think, of all time is Mere Bhi Sanam Khane by Paratullah and Heather, published in 1949, I believe. If you can read it in Urdu, please read it in Urdu, even if it's difficult. Do not read the author's self-translation. It does not. She's a great writer in Urdu, but not in English. It's an extraordinary work with some of the most beautifully crafted sentences in Urdu that I've ever read. The sentences can go on forever, and it's her first book as a very young woman.
Okay, thank you. So before we end, we're going to end with Gioia telling us her favorite novel.
No, just because I read and translate so many novels in my spare time. I read essays by, I don't know, Vonnegut, Axley, and Flannery O'Connor. That's those three names, but it's non-fiction.
Thank you all very much for being part of this panel, and thank you all for attending. Have a good day.